That's a real bombshell. Tether is moving its corporate headquarters to El Salvador. This is especially explosive. There's Tether, the largest on and off-ramp for Bitcoin is. A lot of capital is flowing through USDT here. Tether is flowing into Bitcoin. There's been a lot of momentum around this lately. Is Tether backed? Is it not backed? Now there's the whole story about whether Tether was banned in Europe or not banned, but at least not. It's NICA licensed. And now Tether has basically come to the conclusion. They've come to the conclusion to move here to El Salvador. This is making big waves, but there's also criticism. But what's even crazier, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, one of the most relevant banks in the world, and also one of the most powerful people in the world. He criticizes Bitcoin deeply. He says it has no intrinsic value. It's only for criminals and a lot more. So we really have two things that are extremely explosive. There are really big waves being made around Bitcoin. By the way, if you're wondering where I am right now, I'm currently on a plane. I'm not telling you the country I'm flying to yet. Feel free to drop a comment down below. Where I'm flying to next, I actually just left El Salvador. Bitcoin has failed now in El Salvador. No, just kidding, Bitcoin has definitely not failed in El Salvador. But let's take a look inside. What's going on here right now? Here we see the official announcement. Here, the CEO of Tether, Paulo Ardoino, is also writing. He writes here that El Salvador is the beacon of freedom. So here, the new place of freedom is where the regulation is just better. Beacon of freedom is, well, here. The new place of freedom is where the regulation is just better. He says, yes, that Oakland is a super leader. And that's why they're going to El Salvador with Tether now. And all of this is really quite interesting, because as already mentioned, Tether really, the biggest on and off ramp is here where liquidity flows into Bitcoin. Also, Tether is also a big Bitcoin holder here. So Tether often buys Bitcoin with their profits. At the same time, Tether is one of the largest holders of US Treasury bonds, having more US Treasuries than Germany now. And Tether is becoming a really big player here. That could even be relevant for the US dollar. Donald Trump didn't just want to focus on Bitcoin, but also push stablecoins forward, I'd say. Now Tether has probably had enough and they've swapped over to El Salvador. I mean, they also mentioned that it's basically because of the emerging markets, because they just want to get a stronger foothold here in the emerging markets, so in the developing countries. Some people say, Mr. Salva, you still have a third world country, but it definitely makes sense because a lot of people just don't have access to the dollar. So they're basically going through a proxy here through a stablecoin USDT Tether. That means every USDT represents $1 US. If you just look at Zip Up or whatever, what's it like in a third world country? There are no dollars available. Then Tether is already a better option here. Step or a better vehicle. How easy it is here for the local fiat currency to hyperinflate by like 100% a year or something. And all of this is also a bridge to hyper-Bitcoinization because it means that people are now learning about self-custody. People are learning how to manage their assets in self-custody. Because you can actually manage stablecoins on your hardware wallet just like Bitcoin. You're still dependent on the US dollar because if that hyperinflates, then Tether is basically worthless too. But you do have more self-sovereignty now, like maybe a lot of people with their local fiat currency. Paulo Ardoino now says of this decision is a natural progression for Tether, as it allows us to build a new home, encourage collaboration, and strengthen our focus on emerging markets. And in the end, it is interesting that more and more people, for example, are leaving the EU because everything is getting so heavily regulated there. Here too, Tether now has to pull back some of its stablecoin in the EU. Coinbase has also pretty much pulled the stablecoin out of the market. Here, in Europe, it's just that there's too much regulatory uncertainty. And now companies like these, fintech companies, Bitcoin companies, they're heading to places like this. El Salvador. I was just recently here with the CEO of Rumble at the Max Kreisel Wolf Party, here at the Bitcoin Wolf Party. Not at a table, but close by, like one table over or something. He has now also started his cooperation with El Salvador. That means there are now more and more big companies that want to focus on innovative freedom here, that are now going to El Salvador. That's definitely true. Crazy. But in the end, that's game theory. Some countries are shutting themselves off from Bitcoin. That's when the companies bail, that's when the people bail. The individuals. Also, Max Kaiser, the multimillionaire, is bailing out of the USA. Is going to El Salvador. Allocates his capital here, allocates his time here, allocates his awareness, his food brand, or whatever you want to call it. This is a movement that will happen more and more, that we're really seeing vote with your feet here. That people don't just vote on the ballot, but they also vote with their feet. That's why there are so many freedom-loving people who come to places like El Salvador, when you just feel much safer here regulatory-wise as a Bitcoin user. Like in the EU, even though it's really, really unfortunate. Anthony Pompliano also made a very interesting statement about that. He said that's a decision that isn't so relevant in the short term, but will make huge waves in the long run. So this is going to be something really, really big. I can definitely imagine that El Salvador will attract a lot more big capital. That El Salvador will attract a lot more big companies who are relocating their company headquarters to El Salvador. By the way, it's also interesting because a lot of people have said the El Salvador project is now, because of the EMF situation, failed here. But now we're seeing things like Tether or, for example, Rumble moving their operations to El Salvador. And that really doesn't make any sense. If the project in El Salvador had failed here, that all the Bitcoin companies are now moving to El Salvador. Dude, you really need to check this out. What one of the most powerful people in the world, Jamie Dimon, says about Bitcoin. That's really intense and highly explosive. But just listen for yourselves.
Bitcoin itself has no intrinsic value. It's heavily used by sex traffickers, money launderers, and ransomware. So I just don't feel good about Bitcoin. I applaud your ability to want to buy or sell it, just like I think you have the right to smoke. Usand, don't think you should smoke.
It's just too crazy how the classic fiat world is still trying to fight against Bitcoin. But even Jamie Dimon will eventually have to realize that he can't fight Bitcoin, that he has to join in here, that he can't fight Bitcoin, that he has to join in here. Just like Michael Saylor, just like Larry Fink, Jamie Dimon will eventually have to realize that he basically has to join in. But what's interesting is that JP Morgan is actually more open to Bitcoin here than it is back home. Jamie Dimon himself will take a closer look at that in just a moment. Because here, the reporter confronts Jamie Dimon with his statement that he made here. He said here about Bitcoin that it's being used as a Ponzi scheme and as useless as a rock. So those were his past statements. Now Jamie Dimon adds to this statement. He says here that Bitcoin itself has no intrinsic value. It's being massively used by money launderers and ransomware folks. So he's basically saying Bitcoin has no use. It's completely useless. You can't do anything with it at all. It's just like a rock. You can't do anything with a rock either. Although that's not really true. You can actually do something with a rock. You can throw them at other people, or you can build houses or whatever. You can do a lot of things with rocks. But anyway, Jamie Dimon says here that Bitcoin is really, really bad. That's especially interesting because Jamie Dimon has a lot of influence here. That means a lot of people are definitely listening. Jamie Dimon, I even believe Donald Trump, is the one being managed by Jamie Dimon. So large parts of Donald Trump's portfolio are basically managed here by Jamie Dimon, or from JP Morgan or Jamie Dimon. I'm not quite sure. I can totally imagine that Donald Trump, if he ever sees me here, Eric Trump. And so he's going to pull him aside here. I have to honestly say that he also mentioned here, he has no problem when other people use Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies here. At least that's very, very fair. That he says for himself personally, he doesn't see any intrinsic value. Value for himself personally, he doesn't see any benefit. He personally sees it only as a tool for criminals. But if other people want to use it, then they can do it just the same. He says he also accepts it when other people smoke. Oh, it's shaking quite a bit right now. Now it's working again. He also says he has no problem when other people smoke. Just like you have the right to operate Bitcoin here. He says you shouldn't smoke. You shouldn't use Bitcoin. But if you want to use it, then just go ahead and use it. If we also look back into the past, then statements like these were often a very good buy signal. When the areas that rely on fiat, which depend on the dollar and so on, shoot against Bitcoin. I'll also put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily buy Bitcoin. Here, with the code BitcoinHotel50, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Super easy, intuitive platform for beginners, advanced users. Definitely recommend it. And then you can also front-run Jamie Dimon here, because at some point, Jamie Dimon will also come to the conclusion here, buying Bitcoin. Now, people have actually posted in X what's currently going on here at JP Morgan around Bitcoin. And actually, it is the case that JP Morgan says that Bitcoin is becoming a structurally important part of portfolios. They actually published that. Also here is J.P. Morgan, an authorized participant of BlackRock's Bitcoin spot ETFs. So JP Morgan is definitely involved in Bitcoin here. And then we have JP Morgan saying, I have Bitcoin. Gold has already overtaken investors' portfolio allocation. So the crazy thing is, even if Jamie Dimon is shooting down Bitcoin, JP Morgan can't just overlook Bitcoin. If they simply say, okay, we don't want to deal with Bitcoin, then they're missing out on massive revenue opportunities, like being an authorized participant for Bitcoin ETFs. If you just say, okay, we don't want to deal with Bitcoin, then you're missing out on massive revenue opportunities. Like, for example, as an authorized participant for the Bitcoin ETFs. In the end, that's what a lot of people are going to realize in the future. Bitcoin can be fought. You can wage war on it, but then you end up with massive competition fallout. All the people who are in on Bitcoin are benefiting, and the ones who aren't involved with Bitcoin are just getting left in the dust. I don't think we need to get into that here, that Bitcoin isn't primarily for criminals, or any ransom people, ransom attack folks or something like that, who carry out ransomware attacks or whatever. That's just a stretch. I've mentioned that so many times in videos, but the intrinsic value is actually very, very interesting. That Jamie Dimon says there is no intrinsic value. In the end, you could say that nothing has intrinsic value because value is always subjective. But here are just a few things. For example, inflation protection. Bitcoin is limited to 21 million. It's transparent. Security through cryptographic encryption. It is censorship resistant. It is fungible. Every Bitcoin is of equal value. Fast and inexpensive. Cross-border transactions are what we have here with Bitcoin. Property sovereignty, control without intermediaries, independence from traditional financial systems, possibility from hypertransactions. That's something you don't really have with the dollar in the same way. Open source software, which isn't something you take for granted in a money protocol. So anyone can basically verify everything here. I'll also drop a link down below to a TREZOR hardware wallet, which is also open source, where you can really hold your Bitcoin with self-sovereignty on an open source tool. That's really, really important, that you're working with open source devices, not just in the Bitcoin protocol, but also here when you're storing Bitcoin. Here, you can also get a 10% discount on a Bitcoin hardware wallet if you use the code Bitcoin Hotel. Then with Bitcoin, we also have the robustness of a worldwide network of nodes. So Bitcoin can't really be taken down. Completely global, all at once, the Bitcoin nodes would have to be taken down in parallel. We have a store of value, we have protection against capital controls, increasing acceptance by merchants. Bitcoin is, I think, it's already the second most accepted currency after the US dollar. So it's being accepted in more places around the world. Bitcoin is accepted just like the euro, you gotta check it out. So yeah, we don't really need the whole list right now. We need to go through everything. Bitcoin to the moon. It's a very clear thing for me. Let me know in the comments what you think. And now I actually have a seed phrase story for you that you definitely need to check out. And if you're out and about in Germany and interested in Bitcoin, you definitely need to check this out.
Bitcoin Beginner Workshop in the unique setting of the Bitcoin Hotel in Plochingen. In our 2-day course, you'll learn what Bitcoin really is, how the blockchain works, and why Bitcoin is shaping the future of finance. Our experienced expert Daniel Troster from the Sound Money Bitcoin podcast will give you practical advice on how to buy Bitcoin safely, manage and apply. He places a special focus on storing with a hardware wallet. This course is perfect for beginners. Secure your spot now and save €50 with the code Bitcoin Hotel 50.
I'm signing off here. You can see relatively little here from the plane. Go ahead and drop your tips on where I'll land next. See you later. See you later. Peace out.